So I'm just going to tell you how we're going to frame the session. So when we were asked to do this session, it was supposed to be around parenting and media. And in discussion, we felt like, well, parenting is more of a label than a person, because lots of people raise children in lots of different structures. So we thought we'd do it more about diverse families and diverse uses and what we do know and where the gaps are. So that's sort of broadly our plan. So since that first meeting that we had, and there was a little group of us that did parenting and media who met together, there's been a lot of research that has come out in this framing. It is disproportionately mother and father centric, hasn't really thought about other kinds of adults that take care of children and help to raise them. I don't see what you guys were saying. Okay, so we wanted to think about what do we know so far? So there's some things where the research is really starting to come together, and we can say across domains, or specific domains, it's true for kind of all kids of all ages, right? So if anyone was in the previous session, devices in bedrooms, bad for sleep. Doesn't matter if you're very little or a teenager, it will delay onset, it will interrupt, it will have lower duration. So that could be just for all kids. Some things might be very specific to the age of the child, right? So when we think about displacement in early childhood hits like a whole range of things you're displacing. Where in adolescence, it might just be around self-regulation, or it might just be around a peer interaction. It's a very different kind of process, and we haven't unpacked that very well. When we think about media research, we are at least, that's very bright all of a sudden. I feel like I should break into song. Okay, so when we think about media research, it was blasphemous 10 years ago to be like, we're focusing too much on screen time, and now everyone's like, we've focused too long on screen time. It's good for displacement to think about, the amount of time, but there's so much more. It doesn't get at what you're doing, who you're doing it, why you're doing it, what are you not doing, right? So we have to move beyond screen time. And then we really have not made a lot of movement in thinking about the diversity of uses. We haven't thought much about the different ages. And even like adolescence, we lump adolescence as teens. If you are emerging into adolescence, if you're in the very start of it, if you're heading to college, those are very different kinds of things, even hormonally, right, of what's happening to you. And we haven't unpacked that very well. We haven't looked very well at different family structures and resources of who's in the home, how many people are in the home, what kind of resources for the home. And we really haven't thought very well about contextual issues. And from the macro level, like systemic racism and discrimination, to the very immediate, like housing. Are you housed? How many people are in this house, right? And so to sort of move this around, we have to get into these more diverse questions. It is unfortunately happening at a time in the US where federally we're not supposed to use that word, and funding is not being prioritized in that way. And that is why our panel is like, we are going to talk about that during this session today. So that is the plan. So it's always nice to get a little science plus some discussion. So we're going to structure it this way, where each of our panelists is going to present for 7 minutes. And Delaney's going to help us stay to 7 minutes. Something about this topic. We won't do questions then. Then we're going to have a target discussion on 4 topics that we thought would be important discussion topics, and then we're going to open it up to larger questions. I'm unsure whether we'll have the Slido piece or the microphone, but there is a microphone set up here, and we're happy to use those interchangeably. We have the really good fortune is that the breakout session's right after this session, so we can go to another room and actually talk about this, and everyone else gets a chance to speak as well. So if this topic resonates with you, please join us for the breakout session in Magnolia after this, where we'll talk more about it. Okay, and then our conflict of interest slides. Just so you know, these are sort of specific roles that would have a conflict, and then the funding that is tied to the research presented today. Okay, so to get started, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Sarah Coyne, who's a professor of human development in the School of Family Life at Brigham Young University. She received her Bachelor's of Science in Psychology from Utah State University and her PhD in Psychology from the University of Central Lancashire in Preston, England. Her research interests involve media, aggression, gender, mental health, and child development. She's also one of the most prolific researchers across these areas. I'm sure you have cited her many times, because she has over 200 publications on these topics and others. She speaks regularly to families and teenagers about using media in positive ways, and she has 5 children and lives in Utah. So let's welcome Sarah.
Thanks, Stephanie. I'm really, really excited to be here today. I love children's screens, and I'm grateful we're here together. There's so many things that we could talk about in terms of parenting and family. The context that I've decided to focus on is parental mental health, stress, exhaustion, guilt, all of those things. Okay, historically, this conversation always has a discussion about this, right? And so it's like parental media monitoring strategies, restrictive, rules and regulations, active, talk to your kids about media, co-viewing, watch media with your kids, right? And a lot of it is focused on that. A little less on this last one, I love this one, it's deference. So it's the idea of, I've taught my kids, I trust them to make the right decisions, and so I'm going to support their autonomy with kind of what they want to do, okay? So that's historically what we've looked at with parenting and media. I know the other session is about problematic media use, but I'm going to also talk about problematic media use because that's a lot of what I study in the context of parenting. So we know that problematic media use is when media interferes with the ability to function in really significant ways for children. And at the last Children's and Screens conference, I actually presented this research looking at where this starts, right? So we were able to find pretty significant symptoms at age 2 that were relatively stable over time and related to some negative outcomes there. What's really frustrating is that the parental media monitoring literature tends to be really mixed in terms of if I'm talking to my kids about media and setting rules and all these things, it's like weakly to not related to problematic media use. And so parents are frustrated. They're like, we're doing all the right things, and my kids still can't get off their phone. What the heck, right? Okay, so why? So I wanted to show this theoretical model. This is the DREAMER model with Rachel Barr and Heather Kikorian, Jenny Radesky, and myself. And thanks for taking pictures. This makes me happy. We all met at Children's and Screens many, many years ago. So this model really talks about the wider family media ecology, okay? And so it's like so many different things are going on, and we need to know, what's going on with the parents and what's going on temperamentally with the kid and what are the wider structures and why do parents give their kids media in the first place? And when their kids are on media, how are parents responding and what are they watching and the context and all of the different things, right? So we try to kind of capture that in one model, okay? So family, media ecology, wider than just mediation matters. And then I also wanted to bring up this slide. So we had another Surgeon General advisory that came out recently about the stress that parents feel, all right? Which is significant, okay? 41% of parents say that most days they are so stressed out they cannot function. That's not good. Like, that's high, right? That's really high. 70% of parents say it's more difficult than it was 20 years ago, with children's use of technology and screen media as the top 2 cited reasons, okay? Well, parents are really, really, really stressed out right now. Okay, so the context I'm going to talk about with all of that together is parental mental health, stress, burnout, and guilt. And I'm just going to give you like a little bit of academic research in each of those areas before I kind of end up with bigger questions. A lot of this comes from our Project Media study. It's a longitudinal study when kids were 6 months of age to 8.5. And so really focusing in on the early years of development here. Okay, so the first one that I want to talk about when we think about families, right, is parental mental health. This is some research from my colleague Haley Holmgren, and she's looking specifically at postpartum depression. So this was measured when kids were 6 months of age. It significantly predicted both child and parent problematic media use 2 years later, right? And again, remember, right, so at age 2, we're already seeing those symptoms, and then it just kind of continues on. And so we really need to start focusing on parental mental health at a very, very early age. Okay, the second one is parental stress, right, which Surgeon General highlighted. A few studies for you there. Parental stress was related to higher levels of child media use just in general. And then this was really interesting, this is by Ron Warren, but also found that parents who are stressed use a lot of really restrictive mediation. And so those two kind of don't fit for me, so I need to like unpack that a little bit. It's related to technoference, which is when parents are using technologies in ways that interfere with their interactions with others. And then we just, this is under review right now, we looked at both parent and child stress, and we found that parent stress was related to using technology to deal with that stress in the presence of children, which was then related to higher levels of problematic media use by their kids. So parent stress was a much better predictor of problematic media use than child stress was. I was kind of surprised about that. Okay. Another context is parental burnout and exhaustion, and you're like, maybe they're the same thing, and they're certainly linked. Burnout and exhaustion is like the extreme level of stress, right? So physical and emotionally exhausted by caregiving, right? So much so that I'm emotionally distancing from my kids. I'm just kind of like numb. I'm so overwhelmed. I'm so stressed out. I can't even function, right? And remember, that was like high, and the sense of incompetency in one's parenting role. Like, okay, I know media is not great for my kids, and I'm just so tired I can't do anything about it, right? This study found 14% of parents experience parental burnout. And then this is research with Project Media and also my colleague, Cara Swit. We found that higher so parental burnout was related to higher parent-child conflict and lower closeness, and then also both child and parent problematic media use. Okay, the last context I want to talk about is parental guilt. This is something that's received almost no research in the literature. It tends to be related to parental stress over children's media use, but we developed this media guilt scale, and it looks at the guilt parents feel over their children's media use and also their own media use around their children. And I've just given you kind of the percentages so you can take a look at there. The top one, I feel bad if I'm inconsistent in my parenting or disciplining my child around media. I feel bad if I put my own needs regarding media ahead of my child. And then this is like hot off the press, like just ran it before I came here. What's related to feelings of guilt? And not surprisingly, okay, so child problematic media, parental depression, and then child media efficacy, which is the idea of like, I'm not doing a great job with my kids. And that should be actually negative, 0.34 right there. Okay, so what the heck do we do about all of this? So this is actually from the Surgeon General's report. And what it does is it talks about at different levels. Okay, here are the stakeholders, and then what we can do to reduce stress, burnout, exhaustion, guilt, to increase parental mental health. Because parents who are all of those things, it's really hard to then like sit down and have this great conversation about the harms of social media, right? So bigger questions for discussion, we kind of covered these a little bit. I want to really focus on things like what policies are needed that we don't have that might not be related to media at all, but is going to really have a great impact on children's media use, right? If we help parents, we help kids. And how much of this stress, burnout, guilt is a result of child's media use or as a result of pressures from external forces? And then what other family context matters? So things on my list that I didn't cover, right? Most of this is on mothers. Like how do fathers fit in? Kids in foster care, non-resident parents, extended families, siblings, rural and urban settings, low-income families, immigrants and refugees. Like the amount of stress immigrants and refugees are experiencing in our country right now, like, okay, their kids on YouTube, so what? Like, we're worried about ICE coming and getting us in the night, okay? We can do better, and we should do better. So, thank you.
All right, it's a bit of a whirlwind here. Okay, so next up is AnneMarie McClain, who we roped into this, but hopefully will be a regular person at Children and Screens. AnneMarie McClain is an assistant professor of media science at Boston University's College of Communication. Her research focuses on finding ways to use and design media to promote positive outcomes among kids and their families, including minoritized children and their families, or marginalized, sorry. She is an educational consultant for GBH Kids, a children's book author, and former elementary school teacher. AnneMarie holds a PhD and master's degree in communications art from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a master's in human development and psychology from Harvard Graduate School of Education, and a master's in child education from CUNY Hunter College. So help me welcome AnneMarie. And it's this big red button on the top. It's the green one. This one. Okay, awesome.
All right. So we've all heard that representation can matter for kids, and by extension, that it can matter to the families who are raising them. And representation in children's media today in the US is fiercely contested. And those tensions, arguably, only serve to underscore the importance of media representation for children. If families, educators, policymakers, and others didn't think that media could socialize kids around identity, the representation in children's media, or the lack thereof, wouldn't be any big deal. And as we enter this portion of this conversation, I want to really underscore the importance of family diversity. So we all know that no families are all the same. Families are different. And I'm going to spotlight my work with US Black families, which is some of the only work to date that quantitatively examines how minoritized families use media to teach and talk to their kids about identity. There are many theories out there to suggest that representation can matter for kids, and just to name a few, there's social cognitive theory, the theory of invisibility, and cultivation theory. But what do we know so far about US Black families in terms of why representation can matter for them, and how media might relate to identity development or socialization? In an online cross-sectional study of almost 400 Black parents of children ages 3 to 17, we found some evidence that confirmed some information that we already knew. Like families of all backgrounds, US Black families were engaging in active and restrictive mediation. They were encouraging their kids to consume content that was educational and pro-social, and they were critiquing and restricting access to content that was problematic, violent, and morally suspect. What was new was that we found that Black families also reported engaging in race-related parental mediation strategies that paralleled their interpersonal ethnic racial socialization strategies. Broadly, ethnic racial socialization is how families teach and talk to their kids about identity, specifically around ethnicity and race. And a wide literature suggests that all families do this, but in the US, ethno-racially minoritized families engage in specific practices, including cultural socialization, so teaching kids about identity and history and fostering racial pride, and preparation for bias, so preparing kids to deal with racism. And in this 2022 study, we found that parents reported fairly high rates on a 1 to 7 scale of using media to help their kids with this kind of ethnic racial socialization. So using media to help their child feel positively about identity, to prepare for bias, and to critique and restrict access to anti-Black stereotypes in their children's media. And we found that family demographics played little role. Child age predicted only 2 of the 4 strategies, but we found that child identity mattered. So parents' perceptions of their kids' ethnic racial identity strength predicted higher rates for all 4 strategies. And as such, this raises the possibility that it might be that this kind of socialization can lead to youth racial identity development, and or that youth in families who have this higher ethnic racial identity in them, that they are more likely to have parents who are also engaging in these kinds of strategies. And this finding will need to be, the direction of this relationship will need to be investigated over time, but it's important because parents' own reports of their ethnic racial identity strength were inconsistently related to these strategies. Another study that I will highlight has to do with how Black families used media as a resource to help their child deal with racism. In an online experiment, we randomly assigned about 500 US Black parents to one of 2 conditions. And these parents had children ages 3 to 5, 9 to 11, and 15 to 17. In one condition, the parents were asked to imagine that their child had gotten home that day and had experienced racism. In the other condition, parents were asked to imagine that their child came home and had an okay day. And these are the vignettes for the 3 to 5-year-olds. The manipulation worked. So parents in the racism condition anticipated that their kid would experience more negative affect, and they reported being more worried about future experiences for their child related to bias. Although parents in the OK Day condition also worried about bias. And I'm happy to talk about the stimuli and the details and the theoretical grounding in more length at a later time, but the long story short was that after parents read their vignette, they were asked to pick a show for their child to watch. And we gave them 4 choices. And we showed them one of 2 sets of 4 pre-tested 30-second trailers. The first was a happy, positive show related to entertainment that didn't have anything to do with race, so something like Bluey. We gave them an option to pick a mixed valence show about climate change, struggling polar bears. We gave them an option to pick a positive, upbeat show related to race about racial pride with messages from Black people saying positive, affirming messages, such as Netflix's Bookmarks, celebrating Black voices. And then we also gave them the option of selecting a show about racism, mixed valence content, race-related, such as Sesame Street's The Power of We. So at this point, I'd like you to make your selection. What do you think they picked? I'll give you just a few seconds here. Okay, I'm seeing some results come in, maybe just about 5 more seconds. All right, some mixed responses. No one has selected climate change yet. All right, let's see what the answer is, what actually happened. All right, so here, the big takeaway that I want you to take away is that parents in the racism condition had greater odds of selecting the show about racial pride and the show about racism. We found really minor differences by child age. So as such, these findings suggest that Black parents in the US may want explicitly race-related content even for their preschoolers, even including mixed valence content about racism, and even after a racism incident. And these findings are especially important given that US Black children report regularly experiencing racism in this country. These findings also track with an earlier study where we found that US Black parents reported that they would be likely to start a conversation with their kid should their kid experience seeing on-screen racism in their children's media. Looking ahead, much work awaits, including capturing and measuring child perspectives and the influences of children on parental mediation processes, the short and long-term effects of various identity-related parental mediation. We need to investigate additional antecedents of parents' particular preferences for particular content, as well as the quality and the nature of identity-related parental mediation conversations. And we also, importantly, need to examine these processes among more diverse families, and including examining potential moderators within specific communities, as no community is a monolith. Thank you so much.
Dr. Charmaraman, she's a senior research scientist at Wellesley Center for Women at Wellesley College. She received her PhD in Human Development and Education from UC Berkeley and is the founder and director of the Youth, Media, and Wellbeing Research Lab. Her longitudinal work on adolescent social technology use and parent media monitoring has been funded by NIH, Children in Screens, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, among others. She was co-author of APA's 2324 guidance on adolescent social media, which many other people in this room actually got to work on that as well, and the recent 2025 APA advice on the use of AI in adolescent well-being. Together with the Youth Advisory Board, she co-organizes free digital well-being workshops for middle school girls and allies from underserved backgrounds. So let's welcome.
Everybody. 8 years ago, I was in this audience, got a flyer saying that there's a grant that Children's Screens would would, offer to people who attended the conference, and I thought, I would never get that grant. But I'm gonna apply anyway, and 8 years later, I actually got that seed grant, and I got my first NIH grant a year later. So you never know what's gonna happen. So I wanna make sure that everybody knows about my postdoc, Maya Hernandez, who helped me generate these slides, so I just wanna make sure that, give a shout out to her. But I also just wanted to mention that it's not just the kids that we are talking about here, it's the adults in their lives and the issues they have with their own phone use. And it's not just, how long they're on it, but how many times do they pick it up. And so sometimes you wonder, like, who are the people guiding our youth about their phone use, right? And then I know earlier in this session, in the morning, somebody talked about, parents thinking that social media was like the main culprit of U.S. Mental health. But you also want to know, like, what do the teens think about it? So that really matters too. So social media is up there, but really it's a smaller percentage. It's not the majority. And even the parents, it's not the majority. It's a little less than half thinking that social media is the biggest threat to mental health. So I just wanted to kind of put it out there that there's a lot more context at play rather than only thinking that one singular thing that's affecting us. Now, for some of our qualitative work with middle school youth, which is really the most interesting in my mind, the most critical transition between using media in childlike ways until going to that curiosity world of older content, we asked them, what attracts you to YouTube and what's motivating your use? We want to know why some of them are on it for hours on end and it disrupts their sleep a lot of times. And so you ask them, and actually there's a lot of self-awareness about their emotional regulation. They're seeking positive emotions. They're seeking to quell and cope with negative emotions. There actually is a lot of, almost a sense of agency in using YouTube and different content of the YouTube in different ways that a lot of times parents might think, any use is bad use. It's a lot of either or, black and white. We also found out that, yes, a lot of us can all agree that sleep is probably being disrupted, because phone is in the way, but for the kids that also say it's a distraction, there's other kids that say that actually helps them sleep. And although there's probably data that says it's not good quality sleep, activity data or something like that, but the kids' perceptions of their own sleep quality matters too. Like if they really have a hard time getting to bed because they don't have their stuffy or they don't have that ritual, before bed, that does matter too. And so that's something to think about when you have parental monitoring contexts. Also, we found that the kids themselves would say, yeah, as I get older, my parents don't know really what I'm doing anymore, and they don't know the amount of time I'm spending on it. They don't know what kind of things I'm looking at. I've had kids talk to me about how the parents will see the light go off, by like the curfew midnight, and then they'll put an alarm on their phone and get up at 2 and go back on those binging, rounds. So they know that they have less monitoring. And so we also, Steph and I and colleagues, wrote a paper about parental monitoring in different contexts. And one of the things that we said, put out there on the conversation, we're trying to get the word out, scientific translation out there in the world, not just on a dusty academic shelf. And one of our main takeaways was stricter monitoring didn't always yield better outcomes. In fact, the kids that had the most problematic internet use tended to have the most restrictions on them. And so I wonder, we didn't ask about parental stress, but it could be something that is at play, It could be that it's just a more chaotic, household, maybe less help, So there could be many, many reasons, but we don't know the chicken or the egg problem. Was it problematic use that came first and then more restriction, or restriction came problematic use? So that's something for longitudinal work. So in our emerging studies that we just got to last month, so this is all like fresh off the press, we were looking at different household structures, and there's so many different ways we could look at how different household compositions, impact technology use. But when you look at the national average of first smartphone use, it's 10.3, which is always surprising to me because it's like 4th grade, right? But when you have two-parent households, they're more likely to be at the national average, a little bit more on the protective side. But then when you look at no parents, that means like grandparents and aunts and older siblings taking care of the young people, and versus single parents, it's definitely a lower age at getting smartphones. Now, before we jump to conclusions about whether that's good or bad, we don't want to have a completely deficits, lens either, but there are some households that really need to rely on smartphones, but it's a lot more affordable than a desktop computer, right? And so that's their way of having internet access. So just wanted to put it out there. And then another thing that I'm going to just show you a couple of surprising results, some stuff that we're yet to publish. But when you look at pre and post COVID pandemic, we saw overall screen time allowances increase over time. Parents are allowing their kids longer and longer time use, but they're talking about what to do and not to do on social media. It was higher in pre-pandemic years, but for some reason, post-pandemic, looking at 2023 in particular, you can see that there's, even the two-parent families, there's less talking about what to do and not to do on social media. And so I'm not sure why. I can't wait to dig into that some more, but the social context really does matter. And then when you look into the composition of the family, there's more nuance. Another surprising thing that we found having to do with household composition is that in the two-parent family, there's not much difference in terms of if active communication about technology use impacts their depression. It's pretty much the same, depending on high or lower. But when you look at no-parent families, pre and post-pandemic, the more active communication is less depression in general, but in post-pandemic, it's actually the opposite. So it makes you wonder, what is the content of that active communication? So we don't want to treat all active communication as the gold standard, as like, oh, so healthy, active communication, but what is the active? What are you communicating? Are you communicating like fear and the world is ending, climate change, that kind of stuff? Or are you, talking about, self-regulation skills and those kinds of things? Another surprising thing that I found was that the higher restrictive monitoring, it actually dampened potential for prosocial behaviors. And so how in the early session earlier today, there was somebody that said, okay, the more you're on social media, you get a lot of good and a lot of bad. Same thing here. One of our other studies, just to close out this my part, is that if you get a phone between 10, comparing 10-year-olds and 13-year-olds, there's not much difference in terms of negativity, except for in terms of positivity, except for you get to have a lot more knowledge about how to use social media in positive ways than earlier you started. And so this is something I wanted to just put out there. That restriction sometimes comes at a cost. And I'm going to leave with this slide, as we can talk more about future directions, but here are just some initial thoughts. Thank you.
Like Goldilocks, I got to sit in everybody's chair. It was very fun. All right, we're going to be. Oh, I made myself a slide because I felt left out. So if you're wondering, I have kids and I study them too. Okay. Okay, so we thought we would do some targeted questions, given what has been presented, and because we have 3 experts that have worked in this domain. So what do we know about parenting in media? That applies to all types of families or all child ages. That one might be like a pervasive message across the board. Maybe we'll just start this way. Let me know how to start.
Sure. It's on. I'd say my main thing is that no matter what kind of family you're from, to always have consistent communication. It's not just a one-time talk, like the sex talk. It's like it's many stages, many phases, and the kid is going to be ready for certain types of topics within the realm of social technology at different stages in their life.
Yeah, and I would add, as we've heard, families are really, really stressed out, and hopefully at least most families are really just trying to do the best they can.
Okay. I would say, radicalized, hateful content is not good for anyone. I have not seen any studies showing that problematic media And then I would also say that like the parent-child relationship as a whole matters more than media use.
Great, so now we're gonna flip, go back this one. Okay, so then this would be the other side, is like, what do we know about parenting and media that varies for different types of families, child ages, households? This would be like, previous with everything that might be the same, this might be, where do we need to look at more differences? And Survey, you want to start with your working microphone?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I studied kids from 0 to 18, so age definitely matters. So if you think about like parental mediation strategies, like deference would be bad for probably most 2-year-olds, right? And it's probably great for 17-year-olds. Whereas like really high restriction, it's probably not great for 17-year-olds, but it's probably good for 2-year-olds, right? So yeah, so age, developmental level, all of those things definitely matter.
Yeah, and I would say that representation obviously varies by different communities, and so families are dealing with different content for their children, and they have different things that they need to help their child navigate, which creates a whole lot of issues and challenges, and also sometimes joys and privileges.
And also their journey of social connection. Are they trying to be more socially connected to communities that make them feel like they matter? Or are they trying to disconnect from harmful content? So everybody has their own goals.
I'm gonna add my thought just while you were talking, because we had a meeting yesterday about the phone bans and things, and I work a lot with low-income families and unhoused children, and the not having an access to a phone has a different consequence for certain populations that may be smaller than most kids, but also seem to be getting left out of a lot of these discourses too. So I just wanted to do a highlight. And also the earlier age of phone use also speaks to different structures and responsibilities for why you need to be connected in a different way. Okay, so then we were talking in our group. There's like a lot of headlines. There's a lot of doom and gloom. And we feel as researchers there are a lot of misconceptions or not as well examined for how definitively the popular press and others talk about it. So maybe each of you could speak to some misconceptions that are really out there but don't have the empirical basis to support that. AnneMarie, you want to start?
Sure. So one of them is just building off of what Stephanie just said. If kids are struggling, just take away their phone. We know there's data emerging that minoritized kids might be using those phones and the internet to build connections that maybe they can't find in their everyday setting, or that they need to supplement in some important ways. It's also important to think about families often do really know their children best, and so it might not be the case that it's never a good idea to take away a child's phone, but that situation needs to meet that child and that family and that circumstance where they are. And then also, as you all know, right, teens are part of their healthy development is establishing themselves in a way that's separate in some level, right, from their families, and so parents and caregivers need to be aware of that. Another misconception that I'll talk about is that kids can't handle the digital world without their parents being right on top of them. Oftentimes, kids are really scrappy and they're really brilliant, and they can figure out a lot of stuff that we don't always give them as much credit for, right? So it's kind of a yes and. They do have ideas, they're quick, and the media literacy needs to be built in to equip them for this digital world and to be ready when something bad happens, so it's not the first time that they're seeing that.
Okay. Two things come to mind. So first is the wait to 8. So I don't know if you've heard about this, but it's like wait until 8th grade to give your kid a smartphone. I don't really see any empirical evidence that that is a great idea or that something magical happens at age, 13? If you've parented an 8th grader or been an 8th grader yourself, you know that's kind of a tricky time of life. So introducing like the first cell phone feels like kind of hard there. So the number one question I get asked from parents is like, when should I get my kid a cell phone? It's always like, it depends. Like, it just depends on so many different things. So that's one that I just don't see empirical evidence on. The other one is that most parents are failing in this feel that way, right? And like I presented a lot of evidence there. I think parents are doing the best they can, and I think that many families are doing beautiful, beautiful things in this space. And I wish we could talk about those beautiful things a little more.
Yes, so one thing that comes to mind is that restriction is always better. And as I showed you my slides earlier, that sometimes there's a cost to restriction. And in fact, earlier in the session, I know AnneMarie who talked about the deciding between two hard, a rock between a hard stone. It's basically, do you want to fight about the phone, and that's like your family life, and then, or do you want to give in a little bit and have a negotiation of, it's not just all or nothing. There's some kind of gray area that can help with the kids' developmental, stage that they're in, and also help them test drive their self-regulation skills. But it's often not like, zero is the goal. I think that is a misconception out there that zero technology use is the goal. The other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of myths is the idea that, parents aren't as savvy with the technology as their kids. And I think that used to be a lot of the running refrain. But now we've got, people, millennials and our kids now, and, they know internet, they've had email, they've got their social media, they're influencers themselves. In fact, I was hearing some kids at my kids' middle school complaining about their parents trying to be influencers and trying to be on Instagram all the time and always curating themselves, and so the kids have to tell the parents, okay, this is too much, you need to stop, there's a lot of sharing here. And then one last thing, if that's okay, one thing that also comes to mind is the idea that only marginalized youth find benefits to social media, and I find that really a strange thing to say, because every kid at some point feels marginalized in some way, whether you're the only person who likes D&D in 6th grade, or you're the person who has diabetes in your school, or somebody who has a divorced parents and they're going through that. Everybody feels marginalized in some way, and so sometimes it's not just about buckets of people, it's about buckets of experiences that young people go through in life, and that they might need some electronic or non-electronic help at some points, depending on what they need.
Thank you. Actually, I kind of want to put Sarah and Linda together, and we think about restriction and age. And this is a lot of the international discourses, like blackouts, bans till certain ages. But in every other area, we think about scaffolded, development. You want to learn to drive, you have to do a class, you have to do scaffolded hours, you have to everything else you can build up to it. Middle school, you get your planner for changing classes, right? And suddenly we're in this space, we're going to give you nothing, and then we'll give it all to you, right? And then we should really think about what are developmentally appropriate and capacity building recommendations that put those together. Okay, so the last one that will be our panel one, and then we'll open it up to all of you, is in thinking about the future. Where do you think the field is headed, and what should we consider, focus on, be worried about, be excited about? You can take this in a positive, negative, or neutral way. You want to start?
Sure. I always go back to the youth are our future. They're the future people, digital systems, designers. And so I would really love it if youth were more involved in helping their parents understand their own situations. Because this technological world that all the parents have lived in are not the same as what's happening today. Even my college students, they talk about the high school students and middle school students that they mentor. They're like, oh my God, they're a whole different beast. They know so much more about how algorithms work and how AI works than they ever did. And so it really is about the youth helping us understand as adults what their digital lives are about.
I would say academic industry partnerships need to really be at the forefront of everything that we're doing, and including kids and families' voices throughout those partnerships as well. So a whole big partnership, everyone involved, boots on the ground.
This may be famous last words. I'm really kind of excited and nervous and excited about AI. I'm what is that going to do for our society? I feel like I'm in the room the first iPhone was created, and how that shaped so many different things, right? And these media scholars, it's okay, all right, how's this going to impact kids and families and all the things, and also it's going to change everything. And so
as Phineas and Ferb would say, this is a word I learned from them, I'm nervous-sided, which is a nice word to say.
That's a great word. I'm going to remember that one.
Kids don't.
Okay, we did start late, but until we can do about 5 minutes of questions, and then we will have a breakout space where we can really talk on the same level. Do we have a slide of questions? Maybe just go to the microphone. Yeah? Yeah. There's a microphone. I just walk right up. Fire away.
Hello. Yeah, thank you, first of all, for such wonderful presentations and a discussion. So I'm Sundar Malawarachi from University of Wollongong, Australia. So this is a bit of a problem I think we grapple with in Australia, and I'm sure is applicable to many other countries. And I'm also kind of piggybacking on Stephanie's question about the sort of headlines that are alarmist, and media is always trying to get the clickbaity type of simplistic, alarmist type of narratives about screen use, and that's getting families to be more guilty and overwhelmed, so on and so forth. So as we discussed, we know that there's no one-size-fits-all approach. But what are your tips to get our messages across, to be picked up by media, to get it across to all the diverse families, and how do we cut through the noise? And yeah, what are your tips?
I mean, one cool trick that I found is there's something called Academic Minute. Has anybody heard of it? It's like a 1 minute of researchers talking about their research, and it's an NPR thing, and it goes to 60 different stations. And so you can kind of do your science dissemination through these 1 minute. Well, imagine you're having your morning coffee with your newspaper, and you hear this 1 minute of research, and it's a very bite-sized kind of a thing, and it really helps. And these podcasts get turned into curricula in schools as well. So it's really kind of neat.
I have to say the translation matters, and I do a lot of workshops in the community, and I work with providers, and I work with families, and locally I feel like I do that, and nationally it's been very hard. And I was on a consensus committee for national academies, and we had all the materials and videos and fact sheets. We got a ton of press information, and when we said the science is not at a population level, we can speak to subgroups, they're like, never mind, and they didn't run any of it. And so there is just a vested interest right now to send a very specific message that is now kind of perpetuating this. I think it's going to be one of the biggest challenges.
Melinda Hallahan, I'm here from Western Michigan University, where I'm a faculty in family science and development. And I'm curious, as to something that's been coming up increasingly from students as we talk about some of those topics, and parental mediation and moderation and all this good stuff. It's not just the parental monitoring of technology, but parental monitoring of their youth using technology. This is something that young people are talking a lot about, like location tracking, how the parents are almost massaging with their own anxieties and fears by, tracking their kids. And I've heard some interesting sharing from some of the administrators in our area around considering cell phone policies and things, and finding that the parents are more resistant to bans, actually sometimes than the high schoolers have been. So just about that, the impact of that on developmental work, right, of establishing autonomy and trust and self-efficacy. So curious if there's work or dimensions that you've encountered around that.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. So we know that one of the reasons why parents get their kids a phone in the first place is around the monitoring issues. So around safety monitoring, hey, I want to know where your location is, I want to know all of that information. So kind of starts at a really young age there. We know that parental monitoring in general is associated with positive outcomes in adolescence, just kind of behavioral monitoring, until it gets to this extreme level, right? So then we've got kind of helicopter parenting. I know where you're at all first time, I know who you're with. I can see everything that you're doing. Again, it depends on the developmental level of the kid, but in terms of autonomy development, it doesn't leave space for that. So that's why I'm hoping there's going to be more research on this idea of deference, which is the least studied of all of the parental mediation strategies, because there's something to, hey, I trust you to make your own choices, even if they're not always going to go great, right? But there's something about that, and very, very important, and just being